Alright, so I'm gonna make a video about a certain thing. A certain group of things, series of things, but I guess we'll start off with the breath, as we always do. So yeah, just follow along as I guide you through it. And as always, well, not as always, but you know, what it'll be for a while is the command is Lord Jesus Christ resonance. Now begin by breathing in through your mouth, breathing out through your mouth. Remember, deep, full breaths, breathing in through your mouth, breathing out through your mouth, breathing in through your nose, breathing out through your nose, breathing in through your nose, breathing out through your nose, breathing in through your mouth, breathing out through your mouth, breathing in through your mouth, breathing out through your mouth, breathing in through your nose, breathing out through your mouth, breathing in through your nose, breathing out through your nose, breathing in through your mouth, breathing out through your nose, breathing in through your mouth, breathing out through your mouth, half breath in. So I'm not going to talk about that all that much. I'm not going to talk about breath that much in the video, but what I wanted to talk about today is synchronostats, or psionic codes, if you will. Essentially, when you start to get to like the core of sacred mathematics, you start to realize that, and I've talked about this pretty much in every other video of mine. The Lord, wants to shift our attention to these invisible processes, right? There's all these fractals of information that are flowing through every facet of life, and it is that patternos, right? That pattern that gives form and movement and instructions, if you will, to manifest all of life, right? And by getting to the core of what all of these sacred maths are, getting our attention to be aware of that which is invisible, right? Like this is encoded many times in the Bible, trying to get our attention to focus on that which is invisible, right? Because if we look at the material things in life, we see that there is just mathematics that govern all of it, right? And so if we look even deeper, we start to realize that there are these geometric structures and mathematical principles and matrices that are sort of turning the cogs of everything, right? And when you really start to get into like the sacred G breathing, and the breath tech and all of that, that's when you really start to kind of hone in, because you start to realize that, because the goal is not to get lost in the fractals, right? The tiny parts. It's the goal is to understand that the tiny parts are help us to understand entire systems, entire wholes. These are so. If you think about it, the um, the little points on the wheel, right? So when we go back to the whole thing of the 72 spirits of God, or the 72 names of God, what those are they are little points along the degrees of a circle, right? And each one of those are like little nodal points, little individual puzzle pieces, if you will, little codes, right? Now, the individual codes in and of themselves, um, especially with no direction as well as no awareness of it, um, are not really that helpful to dwell upon, unless, of course, that you're trying to wrap it all up and bring it into a coherent, overarching system. See, this is what the angels are. The angels are, for instance, the triangle is taking three of those points of the wheel, right, and unifying them into a set system, right? Or you can even take the cross, which is what the G breath is, right, and understand that there are these overarching systems through our breath, right? We have the binary coding of the breath, which is mouth, mouth, and nose, nose, right? And then those are like the solstice of the four breaths, whereas the mouth, nose, and the nose, mouth are the equatorial aspects, right? They are the bridges that bring us from one solstice to the next, right? So there are these overarching systems, and these are what the archangels are. So you have your your individual 72 spirits, right? And they go on, forever and ever, right? These 72 spirits are actually, what is it? 6 individual different archetypes. So you have within the zodiac. So within the zodiac, you have 12 main points along the wheel, right? The 360-degree wheel. Each of these 12 zodiac signs govern 30 degrees of the circle each, right? So you have 12 slices of a pie, right? And the 12 zodiac signs rule or govern 30 degrees each. And so each of these zodiac signs, they represent different archetypes, different parts of the mechanism, right? Or of the structure, of the matrix, of the pattern. And the purpose of them is to help us to understand how life itself changes from one to the next. I don't want to say just transforms, because transforming is only 1/4 of the aspect. You have of your 12 zodiac signs, you have 4 initiating, or not, sorry, uh, yeah, you have 4 energies that initiate and get things started, but you also, or I guess, sorry, you have 3 signs that are like initiating, right? And then you have 3 signs that are a period of deficiency and refinement, right? Making do with the little bit of energy that you have. And then you have 3 that govern the transformation, or the growth patterns and the changes that occur through that refinement. And then you have 3 that govern ripening, which is the full bloom of those things. And you can think of it in terms of how a plant grows, right? So you have your seed, and the initiation is the seed being put into the ground, right? That's the initiation, which is being buried, right? It's the death, right? The death of the seed going into the earth. It's not actually dying, but it's symbolic of being buried and being covered up, right? And so it's a beginning, it's a start, right? In the beginning, whatever skill that you're practicing, or whatever it is that you're trying to learn, you don't know anything, right? So in a sense, you get overwhelmed with not knowing what you're doing, and taking on a new skill. It's like your body and your brain doesn't know what it's doing. The refinement process is making use of that small amount of skill that you have in order to improve upon it. And so that's the refinement process. The transformation aspect is whenever you continue that refinement, where you start to actually get it, but you still don't have it. And then the last aspect is the full completion of that being acquired, whatever it may be, which then produces another seed, which then starts the process all over again. This is what is known as the alchemical process. You have rubedo, albedo, nigredo, and citrinitas, right? This alchemical process was, you know, uh, taught in the mystery schools of the West, of, Egypt and Kim or Kemet or whatever you want to call it, all the, the ancient alchemical mystery schools, right? But yet at the same time, in the New World, the Americas, right, the Mayans actually had this principle down as well through their medicine wheel, as well as the harmonics of the Tzolk'in, right, and their awareness of the calendar making as well. See, a lot of these things do apply to time, right, and the reason being is because time itself is like an archetypal engine, right, that's constantly recapitulating or recycling previous energy and building upon itself and building upon itself. You can think of it as like Terence McKenna's model of novelty, if you will, where nature is constantly in evolution, right, and changing and transforming into something else based upon the previous things that have existed. So, like, take for instance the I Ching. The I Ching is one of these systems. But before I start explaining some of these various systems, what I want to say is we truly don't know the source and when these systems came into play. One, because our history has been manipulated, as well as our consciousness in general, to think of these things and to open and broaden our awareness, and our intuition and our intelligence in order to figure these things out and understand them. But the main thing to keep in mind is we don't know where it came from or how or when or who or whatever. We have ideas, like for instance the I Ching came from this guy named Confucius at a certain point in history, but it's all muddled. The main thing to understand though about these systems is that they're mathematical systems, right? They apply to life, but they also apply to various other subgroups of that, right? So some of these pertain to breath, some of them pertain to colors, some of them pertain to music, some of them pertain to time, some of them, and they're all in unison, right? They're all in unity. They're all unified, and they're all working together to produce this life that we live, right? And they're all connected. One thing seemingly unrelated to another thing is actually interweaved in a way that our minds can't understand, right? And so the more that we refine our understanding of these mathematics, these sacred mathematics that are strewn throughout the entirety of the Bible, again, it's that alchemical process we learn, and in time we start to get it, right? The one caveat that I want to say is don't discard intuition, right? And practice these mathematical codes in terms of your breath, because if you the more you focus on your breath and the structure of your breath, right, and the intelligence that's underlying the breath and your intention behind it, I promise you it will give you a whole nother level of intelligence that you have always had, you just haven't been able to tap into yet. But again, all these sources can be utilized in different ways. So for instance, the I Ching is made up of 64 hexagrams, right? These 64 hexagrams are changes in time, right? Because the I Ching is all about understanding that, a lot of people, they, use the divination system of the I Ching where they flip over coins and they build a hexagram, with either fixed or broken lines, etc. But in reality, every single day is manifesting one of these hexagrams, right? These are changes in time that we are experiencing. Now, again, like I said, don't try to think of all the moving pieces all at once, right? The ultimate goal is to try and like discover how these things are being fit into our reality and hone in on what you feel like you need to do specifically and what you need to figure out, right? And also remember that whenever you start to get confused and you're in a pool of details and you can't make sense of them, remember to return back to the fundamentals and the overarching system. But whenever you find yourself being stagnated and too simplistic, you want to kind of extract and go into the details. Um, and there's specific breaths that can help you to, you know, uh, utilize the DMT within your body in order to help guide you through that. So just remember that, use the G breath. When in doubt, use the G breath. I promise you, it will help you out every single time. But a lot of the time is what you're looking for. You may not even know that that's what you need. So just stay open-minded, right? Um, but there's no shame in closing your mind when you need to. But anyways, so the 64 hexagrams are changes within time, right? But these also relate to um, changes within our body, right? Because we have 64 different codons to our DNA, right? So these changes within time are also affecting our genetics, right? As we move through time, right? And again, these are unified systems, so they're interrelating with each other, right? Um, this is what the chessboard is all about, right? The chessboard, as you can see, is about two different sides, right? Black and white, or the masculine and the feminine, the two hemispheres of our brain that are clashing, that are at war. That's what chess is all about, right? It's a battle of the dualities, right? But in all reality, it's about bridging the two and unifying them, because once you capture the king, then it becomes one kingdom. You see what I'm saying? And the chessboard itself is riddled with sacred mathematics, calendrical systems, all kinds of stuff. But the main thing to understand about the chessboard is that it's the magic square of Mercury. So again, the magic squares, these things are more than meets the eye. I promise you. Go in and start studying them, because I promise you there's so much there. It is so much untapped potential. You know what I mean? To discover terma, right? As a terton, okay? If you don't know what that is, look up terma and tertons of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I promise you, it's something that you need to know, because it's connected back to the telectanon. It's connected back to telepathy and the cube journey, etc. Kabbalah. So the magic Mercury itself is a fluid archetype, right? Mercury represents reflection. It represents fluidity. It represents the hermetic seal. It represents the two becoming one, etc. So again, all of these things, anything that has to do with 64, any sort of system, that's connected to the number 64 is talking about all these same things. So for instance, you have your 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, you have your chessboard, you have your magic square of Mercury, you have your 64 Zolkin harmonics, right? Which is also connected to this other one that stands apart, so there's 65 altogether. But the other thing to note is that if you were to look at all four of the basic breaths, beta, alpha, theta, delta, or mouth, 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 nose, 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 and nose, mouth, and you were to create them in chains of 3 breaths, right? So, for instance, the first one would be, 3 mouth mouths. So, beta, 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 and then you would have beta, beta, alpha, beta, beta, forget my hands, beta, 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 alpha, beta, beta, theta, beta, beta, delta, right? And you continue the sequence until you get all of the different possible permutations, which there are 64. Of course, if you're including doublets and triplets, right? So what I mean by that is including making a sequence of 3 of the same one, right? So if you include the doublets and the triplets, so for instance, you can have a code of beta, 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 or alpha, 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 theta, 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 delta, 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 as well as, 2 of the same one. So beta, beta, alpha, for instance, it's got a doublet of a beta because there are 2 betas in that code. So if you were to look at all of the combinations that you can make of the 4 basic, right, which apply to every other set of 4, right? So you have your whatchamacallit, your alchemical sequence, you have your 4 seasons, you have your etc., etc. It goes on and on and on, right? So you have your 64 breath codes, you have your 64 harmonics, 64 hexagrams, chessboard, magic square of Mercury, all of these are interlinked, and they're all giving us information, right, about the changes of time as well as the DNA, right, and the things that are going on in here, right, and it's a very powerful system because it helps us to integrate and understand information. That's the one main thing about Mercury that people need to understand, is why he is the messenger god, right, because Mercury has to do with data and information processing, all that stuff, right? So but if we were to look at the numbers 64 and 65, right? So let's look at the numbers 64 and 65, right? Because these two are interconnected, right, with their systems, right? So if we look at, for instance, on the and thank God for the Mayans and their discovery of the Tzolk'in, because it reveals so much information. So if we were to look at the number 64 as a kin, right? So kin 64 and the Tzolk'in. Kin 64 is what is known as yellow crystal seed, right? Because it has the tone of 12 and the seal of 4, the yellow seed. So it has the crystal tone and the yellow seed seal, giving us yellow crystal seed, right? The one thing to note about crystal seed is that crystal has to do with entire systems with lots of moving parts all working in unison together. That's why I also call the crystal tone the eclectic tone, right? The seed has to do with the word. It has to do with information, data, right? Individual little parts that are being processed and grown within us, right? The seed, right? The sower with the word. So if we were to look at the kin all together, we would realize that it's little tiny moving pieces of information that are being processed, right? The crystals, the crystal seeds, right? The crystal seed. So, and the interesting thing about kin 64 having the crystal tone, the 12th tone of the 13 lunar tones of our Tzolk'in, is that if we were to look at all the different we're talking actual crystals now, like gemstones and stuff, which I actually got this new amethyst from my brothers for Christmas. It's really cool. It's part of a geode that, you know, they sell in little individual pieces. But the interesting thing about crystals is that there are 7 crystal systems, right, and 32 crystal classes, right? I might have that reversed. I need to let me double check. Yeah, 7 crystal systems, 32 classes. Sorry, that's the thing. When you're dealing with a lot of data, right, you tend to start to dip into the things that are not your specialty. Let me see. 7 crystal systems, 32 classes. Let me see if that's correct. Yeah. Okay, so I was correct. 32, and again, that's about the extent of my knowledge when it comes to minerals and crystal structures and things like that. But the point is that there are 32 different crystal classes that have, you know, these variations based upon the 7 crystal systems, right? So you have 7 main systems that are different geometric forms in which crystals grow, but within that you have these 32 subgroups called the classes, which actually give little different variations of how the crystals form, right? So 32 crystal classes, right? That gives you a system of 32, right? This is exactly not exactly, but this is one of the reasons why the name of Christ sums 32 in septenary gematria. The reason being is because his name, Christ, is related to crystals, right? And the inherent information that is stored within crystals. Crystals are so important, and I rue the fact that I'm not a specialist in that field because it is so fascinating. But 32 different crystal classes, right? Now, when you take that over into the human existence, you always have to take into consideration mirroring, right? Because crystals are a physical form, but they also have a spiritual energy. So like a spiritual half, right? That is in the etheric world. So within us, we have one side that's physical, one side that's spiritual. So you have 32 and 32, which gives you 64 altogether. But then again, that also relates to systems of 128, because if you have 64, you always have a mirror of every system, right? So now you have 128, right? But again, we're simplifying it, bringing it back into the overarching uh, understanding of these things. So these crystalline systems are actually containing each of these different archetypal aspects, right, within their structure, right? And so that's why you have all these different kinds of variations of crystals, right? And see, the goal of all this is for us to understand these things, like to go in and start to dissect these things and take them apart and try to figure out what they're doing, because these crystals are able to hold an electrical charge. It's able to conduct electrical charges, etc. Like pretty much all the major components of like microchips are made up with various different metals and crystals, right? And were it not for that hardware, we wouldn't be able to have technology. So we have to understand how that's coordinating what's going on inside us in order for us to figure these things out and be able to tap back into the higher intelligence that God is like awaiting us to figure out, right? So again, all of those things have to do with the crystal seed, right? The crystal systems that are dropping seeds in us at all times. It has to do with our DNA codons. It has to do with Mercury. It has to do with etc., etc., the crystal seed. So if we look at the next kin, which is 65, we see cosmic serpent, right? So that's the tone of 13, the cosmic tone, and the 5th solar seal, the red serpent. Now the red serpent has to do with our physical health. It has to do with our physical body, but in a more etheric aspect, right? It has both the spiritual health, but also the physical health, right? So the serpent energy, right, is our consciousness and our various different plasmas that are moving throughout our body, which is actually housing various aspects of our consciousness, right? For instance, one of the most prominent things, that you'll be aware of is your sexual energy, right? Your orange chakra and the dimension in which that is housing a certain aspect of your consciousness, and look at how much that influences us in our lives, right? Whenever the sexual chakra is overactive and it's dominating your consciousness and it keeps drawing your your omega, your pure undifferentiated consciousness into that realm and getting you to think about those things and those processes, etc. Sometimes or we have our whole stomach, our whole abdomen is a whole dimension, right? And that's your yellow chakra, right? And so that has to do with processing of information and what we're digesting, etc. All these different chakras, right, are these different dimensions that our consciousness can go into, right, through the breath, right, and through the brain waves, and it helps us to understand how these systems are coordinating among each other and helping us to understand what it is that's causing us to either have problems or the things that give us drive and motivation that give us a purpose, etc. So yeah, that's the serpent, right? It's the chakras and the consciousness of the energy that's moving through us, right? The serpentine, right? And the cosmic also has to do with the 13, right, which is the overarching entire Earth herself in the heavens himself, right, as well as our place within that, right? So that's the cosmic tone. It has to do with our individual self in connection to the all, right? That's the 13th tone, which is exactly why well, I don't want to get into that, but yeah, so, and the interesting thing to note is the reason why I mentioned 65 is because the Tzolk'in was actually the thing that brought this to my attention, and were it not for the Tzolk'in, I wouldn't have known that all the 64 systems are actually connected to a system of 65, right? Again, because of the rule of Kollel, it gives relationships between numbers and the one that follows it, right? So Again, going back to your 12 zodiac signs, you have 12, but because of the rule of Kal-El, the number after that, 13, gives a connection between 13 and 12. These are numbers that follow each other. Therefore, they must have a relationship to each other because they're transferring one energy to the next, or one of them is what the number was, but what it became in its next state, right? It is the next step, right? So, and going back to 12 steps and everything like that. Yeah, all this stuff, every last bit of thing in our society is interconnected, right? And, woe unto the people and shame unto the people who are keeping this from us, right? Going back to the cube journey and the 16-day cycle, relating back to the warrior and telepathy and terma and this and that, those 16 warrior the first 16 solar seals, which give us that warrior's cycle, right, are actually the same as the 16 Meyer-Briggs personalities. Yeah, and so the interesting thing to note about 65 is that the Tzolk'in technically has 65 harmonics, 64 which are similar, right, but one that stands apart. And that one that stands apart is the very central one, which is harmonic 33. That's the very center or the very middle of the Tzolk'in, right? And so, again, going back to synteger systems reveal so much, or integer systems, number lines, they reveal so much about the qualities of numbers and the relationship between numbers. You know what I'm saying? Going back to the integer system of 11 and its integer 6 reveals that there is a holographic cube between our hands and there's a holographic cube between our feet. Now, in physicality, we can't see the cube. It's not there. But in the metaphysical realm, it's encoded there. And that's our paradise. That is our Kabbalah that's being encoded in our aura, right? And we have many other geometric aspects about our aura that help us to heal and help us to boost our intelligence and continue our purpose, and also to tap into our deeper self, right? That are there. They're always there. But again, it's like why in the Bible they say that no man has seen God at any time. He who is invisible, this and that, and to seek God, right? And seek the invisible, seek the metaphysical, because that there is where the key lies, right? But so 33, right? So we have the crystal seed, right, which are all the little individual parts of, again, the magic square of Mercury, the I Ching, this and that, the DNA codons, the 3 breath codes, etc., which is ultimately all interconnected within the cosmic serpent, right, the 65. That has to do with our individual energy in connection to the all, right, and the serpentine energy of our consciousness moving throughout our chakras, right? Even as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, etc. That 64 and 65 systems, right, are all centered around that 33. Why? Why 33? Because again, 33. Let's look at the kin on the Tzolk'in. What is kin 33? That's red resonant Skywalker, which has a tone of 7 and seal number 13. I'll say that again. A tone of 7, the resonant tone, and seal number 13, the red Skywalker, right? Ignore the fact that they gave Luke Skywalker a blue lightsaber, and then made the red lightsaber bad. You know what I mean? Red is not evil, and blue does not mean good. So just remember that. But yeah, that's tone 7, seal 13. Well, where have we seen a connection between 7 and 13? Other than the fact that 7 is 13 centiger, 7 is what the entire English alphabet septenary cipher is based off of. 2 sections of 13, A to M, N to Z, all centered around that G and that T in the 7th position in the center, right? And what is the Skywalker? The Skywalker is the prophet. The Skywalker is the one that can see beyond, right? And walk on the skies and look down and see all the patterns see all the different little individual systems, the whole purpose of what we're doing, right? That's the Skywalker, the one who has awakened to that potential, going from the 12th seal to the 13th, which is 12 is yellow human and the 13th is red Skywalker. It is the enlightened state. Again, because 12 and 13, Ken's 12 and 13 are crystal human to cosmic Skywalker, and then look at the next human and Skywalker, right? You have Ken 32 and Ken 33, right? And what is the connection between 32 and 33? That is the connection between the teacher and the preacher. That is the connection between the elevation, right, to the new level of human consciousness. All right. So again, the resonant Skywalker, that is the prophet who resonates, who gets in tune and in synchronization with God's energy, and who, once they resonate, then they can draw that in and put it all together and help them to understand their soul, as well as soul energy in and of itself, the metaphysical, prismatic, holographic rainbow energy that's permeating all of physical matter, and that it's always secret and it's always hidden right there in plain sight for you to choose, if you like, to go and seek, if you want. Again, if you want. It's up to you. But yeah, so 33, it's all based upon Skywalker, right? It's all based on the resonant prophet, right? So yeah, 64 and 65 systems, all centered around 33. But it's also connected to 32, because if you look at 64, that middle point would be 32 and 33, right? Because even numbers have two integers, odd numbers have a single unified integer. But anyways, moving on. So that actually brings me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So going, like, vaulting off of the 12 and 13 connection, right? Marty actually just recently talked about in one of his previous videos about Kabbalah, and I understand that Kaaba and Allah means God's cube, right? The cube of God, right? But he seems to be referring to Kabbalah as a general logic of numbers, right? Which I agree, but I guess whenever, like, I've been referring to Kabbalah, I've been referring to these geometric systems, if you will. So, just to differentiate, when I'm talking about the geometric systems, of the chakras of the body, right? I don't mean that to talk about just numbers in general, but he talks about Kabbalah in a sense that there are either, there are 10, what is it? The 10 emanations of God, right? The 10 emanations, or you could call them 0 to 9 or 1 to 10, right? Now, the interesting thing to note about that, and let me draw up an image here real quick. The interesting thing to note about that, so I've already talked about the Kabbalah system, right, of this right here, right? So you have your 12, right, or yeah, you have your 12 Sephiroth, right? This is the complete Kabbalah. And what I mean by Kabbalah, what I mean is this geometric form here, right? Not just, the vague understanding of numbers as a general topic, right? Because there are 12 here, right? And again, like I've said before, this is encoded within the Bible. Actually, I was saying that the green and the purple are actually the ones that are missing, right? The middle green one and the middle purple one at the very top here, right? And there's actually a verse in the Bible that tells you to put back on those two pieces of the armor of God. So that's really interesting. I'll probably show that here in a minute. But the one thing I want to point out now is this, and this is in response to Marty, right? So the Norse actually, so Yggdrasil, right? Yggdrasil in general is the tree of life, right? It is the central tree, the axis mundi of the world. It's also our chakra system, right? It has to do with our spinal column. It has to do with all of that, right? I'm not going to go into detail about all that, but one thing that I do want to point out here is that So Kabbalah is what I just showed you, right? Typically, when people, talk about Kabbalah, they bring this up here. You know what I mean? I've already went into why that one is incomplete. And this being the real one. You know what I'm saying? So the next thing that I want to point out is this. So Yggdrasil actually has a geometric component as well. So this is the geometric system of Yggdrasil. Right. So Yggdrasil is not just a tree that is, a motif in mythology to help us understand our world, as well as the central axis mundi of our earth, our chakra system, etc. There's actually a geometric corollary to Yggdrasil, and it is this thing. Now, one thing that you'll note with this compared to the complete Kabbalah that I've said is that in the center there are only 5 instead of 6, and on the sides here there's not 3 and 3, there's only 2 and 2, right? So this is Norse, right? This isn't like Kabbalah and sorry, I feel like I got a little kratom stuck in my throat or something like that, but it's making it itchy. But yeah, here's another version of it where it's got like Midgard, it says right there, and then underneath that's Svartalheim, Muspelheim, Jotunheim, Helheim, Niflheim, Lialsofheim, Vanaheim, and Asgard, right? It's got the little, the 9 Norse worlds, right? Again, this is the Kabbalah of 9, right? This is the chakra system of 9, right? So talking about the 10 emanations of God, right? Because the 12 system of Kabbalah, right, is ultimately 12 that's all unified into the 13th, right, which is the 7, right? This is the 9 that's all unified in the 10th. Right? It's all unified into the 10th, right? Because 0 to 9 is right here, just like you say, Marty. 0 to 9, or 10, right? 10. But, I think, let me see real quick. I need to look something up real quick. Forgive me. But I'm going to look up sign language here real quick. Sign language. Jesus. Okay, yeah, so Christ, right? Jesus Christ and sign language. And I remember hearing about this when I was at church, right? Because when I was a kid, they were showing us sign language for whatever reason, and they showed us what Jesus Christ meant. Because
According to Wikipedia, a child is a human being between the stages of birth and puberty, or between the developmental period of infancy and puberty.
Yeah. Sorry, I accidentally hit the button to search, but when I said child a minute ago, it looked up the thing. But anyways, so when I was a kid, they showed us like this sign language, dance, or whatever choreography when we would sing Jesus songs when we were at church, right? And I remember this one being Jesus, right? Where you take your finger and you point to your palm, right? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. That's what that means in sign language, and I just double checked it, and yeah, my memory serves me correctly. So what's interesting about that is if Yggdrasil, right, and the geometric corollary of those 9, the center 5, and then the 4 on the sides, sorry, excuse me. If that's the system of 9, right, then, or 0 to 9, there's your 0 to 9, your 10 fingers, right? Well, what would be the 11 and the 12? Maybe this, your palms themselves. I mean, this is Jesus Christ in sign language, right? It's pointing to your palms. And then you also have the aspect of the Hamsa hand. What is the Hamsa hand? It's an eye right here. Eye on palm, right? It's an eye on the palm of your hand, right? Why? This is the palm, which is an anagram for the lamp. And you hold the lamp, right? You know, like a genie's lamp, you rub the lamp, right? You rub your palms. But my point is that, again, there are holographic corollaries to this. So we have to look at, maybe let's look at the, and again, this is all speculation because, you know, this is something I haven't dipped into very much. But maybe let's say that that would be the 11 and the 12. So now you have your 10, right? Your 10 emanations, your Yggdrasil right here. This is your Yggdrasil, your fingers, just like you were saying, right? The Kabbalah 0 to 9 or 1 to 10. Well, let's say that the Kabbalah of 12 is all 10 of your fingers, including your palms. Let's say that, okay? And then later on, when I go digging into it, maybe I'll actually find corroboration. But again, I'm working from a place of intuition and not just what can be corroborated back to me by finding data in here or in a book, right? I'm bringing this knowledge straight from the Father through my spirit, my breath, right? Because again, I don't charge people money for this, and I constantly have to work in order to pay my bills. So, you know, forgive me for not being more creative and figuring out a way to make money with this, but I've pretty much been living in poverty. But only here recently in the last few months have I actually been lifted out of that really tough situation. So, but anyways, I'm digressing. But the point is that the 10 emanations of God is Yggdrasil, not Kabbalah, right? You know, in terms of these geometric shapes of, you know, the center 6 and then the 3s on the chakra systems is what I mean, right? But Kabbalah in and of itself is also number logic in general, right? In general. But when we're talking about the 10, that's Yggdrasil, right? So, the interesting thing is that the Mayans actually had 2 different sets of gods, right? At least, you know, primary pantheons, but of course they, various different Native American cultures, they probably most likely had way more different gods and goddesses than just these. But you had 2 main pantheons that were known as the Bolontiku and the Oxlantiku. The Bolontiku, which Bolon means 9, right? And then you have your Oxlantiku, right? So the interesting thing here about the Bolontiku and the Oxlantiku is that the Bolontiku is 9 gods of the underworld. So 9. There were 9 Bolontiku, right? 9 gods of the underworld. But then there were also the Oxlantiku, which were 13 gods of heaven. So you had your 13 gods in heaven, 9 gods in the underworld. Now, what's interesting about that is if we're looking at these 2, you know, chakra systems, you know, the geometric corollary for Yggdrasil and the geometric corollary for Kabbalah, right? These are systems of 9 and 12. 9 and 12. They don't become 10 and 13 until you include the 0, which is the whole system, the omega, you know, going back to the breaths, right, and the brain waves. The 9, you know, those 9 individual pieces are ultimately one thing, so that would be your 10th or your 0, right? The 12, the Kabbalah one that I just showed you, you know, that is 12 individual pieces. That's ultimately all 1, so that would be 13, right? So why are the Mayans saying that 1 is 9 and 1 is 13? Only the 13 one is the one that's including all of them. As a unified, it's including that extra step, right? You see what I'm saying? Because the Bolontiku were not only the gods of the underworld, they were also the gods of unconsciousness. They were the gods of if you will, the unconscious mechanisms of nature. It doesn't think in its own, but it acts. It's like the medium, if you will, right? It is the matrix itself. It's just acting on behalf of the universal mind, right? But the Oxlantiku have all 13. So here's what I'm thinking. The reason why there are 9 and 13 was because they're showing you something, that because the the rule of Kalel is only being, revealed in the 13. It's showing like that one is, whatchamacallit, that is the difference between the two, right? So the 9 is just showing the individual parts, but the 13 is showing the 12 plus that extra unified 1 that brings it all together. And that's the difference between unconsciousness and consciousness, right? That consciousness is that extra 1, right? That gives it the unity as well as that extra step, right? So again, all of this is speculation, but it's interesting nevertheless. So that's what I wanted to say on that. I know this probably doesn't make a lot of sense to most people. I'm probably gonna, get some hate for it eventually, but, probably calling me stupid or ignorant or whatever, that I don't know what I'm talking about. But again, my purpose, I'm here to serve as a bridge, right? I am a warrior here to deal with the souls that are coming, exiting the bridge of death, right? And I guide where they go after that. So going back to like the synchronized systems of the Synchronostats, etc. I want to point out something. Sorry, I just got some like phlegm in my throat or something. Excuse my burps. So every single day, right, I do either all of these or some of these, right? These are what I call the Synchronostats, right, according to the law of time, as well as many other things. But basically what I have is the moon and the day of the moon. So today is rhythmic 7, right? So it's the rhythmic moon, which is the 6th moon, and it's the 7th day of that moon. Since the beginning of the Mayan, New Year, it's day 147, or Num, as I call it, right? Forgive me for coining new phrases. Although I don't think I'm making these things up. I feel like I'm just finding things that were lost, Today, the radial plasma is omega up. I didn't do the matrix, or not the matrix, but the cube cycle yet, or any of that. But so of the 18-day cycles based on the 20-day solar seals, we are in the moon diamond, or the cat diamond, the second day of the 18. The Hob time season is 56 out of 91. The space season is in the golden quarter, and that's 14 out of 91. The Hob castle that we're in the third Hob castle, the 43rd out of 52 days. The Hob wave spell, we're in the 5th day of the 12th Hob wave spell. The 7th day of the heptad, or the week, week number 21 out of 52. We are in the 30th chromatic out of 73, and the 37th harmonic out of 91, and the 74th bionic. And that's all of the Hob, right? So your 364/365, those are various different cycles. Again, one of them or two of them or whatever may be incorrect, just because I just update them every single day, and sometimes I get the number wrong or skip a day, and then I forget that it didn't get updated or whatever. But for the most part, they're correct. Now for the Tzolk'in, we're in the last Tzolk'in season, so the 4th season, right? And I don't go by, or I guess, I could look at Jose Arguelles's aspect of the 65 spectrum, but I just go based on, the quarters in general. So you have your Tzolk'in of 260, right? And if you were to divide 260 by 4, you get 65. So 65 days is a Tzolk'in season, if you will, right? Like plainly speaking, right? So we're in the last of that, the 20th day of 65 of the last season, right? The Tzolk'in castle, we're in the green castle, because today is Kin 215. That's the 7th day of this green castle, and I'll explain that in a minute. We're in the 7th day of this wave spell, which is the moon wave spell. We're in the 5th day of this particular chromatic, which is 43 out of 52 chromatics. We're in the 3rd day of this harmonic, which is 54 out of 65 harmonics, and we're in the 1st day of this bionic, which is the 108th out of 130. So today is kin 215, and I just want to explain that just to, give you an idea of how things are, like little incremental parts are moving. I don't give much credence to it or think about it all that much, but I update it every single day just to, it takes me like 2 seconds, and I can keep up to date with all these little individual cycles within cycles within cycles, because sometimes, again, I don't go looking for them, but sometimes they come out at me, and lo and behold, they reveal some very interesting and deep stuff. But I just said all of that not to teach you anything. I was just showing you like all the various different cycles within cycles within cycles, right? Today is kin 215, which is blue resonant eagle, right? Or I also call blue psionic eye. I do the gematria sums for blue resonant eagle, so that would be 63, and without the color blue, just resonant eagle, that would be 48. I determine whether if it's a prime number, if it's a non-prime odd number, if it's an abundant number, if it's a triangular number, a square number, a gap, a galactic activation portal. Look up the loom of Maya. If it's a magic turtle kin, if it's a magnetic bat kin, if it's a code kin or an X kin. Then I list out the divisors in pairs of, like for instance, all the divisors for 215 are 1 times 215 and 5 times 43, right? And then I look at the proper divisor sum, which today is 49, right? And if it's an abundance, I show the difference between the abundance, right? If it's a deficiency, I show the difference of the deficiency of the divisor sums, right? With, again, the number that we're dealing, which was just 215. But then I add the total divisor sum, which includes itself, so add 215 onto that, right? So the deficiency is 166, because the proper divisor sum of 215 is 49, right? Not including itself, because it's proper divisor sum. And then you just subtract 49 from 215, and you can understand its deficiency, right? Which is 166. So we have the kin code, right? The kin code is the tone and the seal number, right? So that's tone 7, seal 15, right? And then we triangulate 215, we square it, we find the square root, we multiply it by 1.26, we multiply it by 1.618, we multiply it by 2.718, multiply it by 3.14, and multiply it by 6.28, and figure out each of those numbers so we can understand the different relationships between 215 and those. So for instance, 1.26 is the doubling of the cube, right? 1.618 is phi, so that has to do with like form, right? 2.718 has to do with E, and that is growth. And then 3.14 is pi, and so I call that love, because it takes, it's the unification of the two, right? Which creates the infinite, ratio of pi, which continues on into infinity, using the two halves of the circle, the male and the female, to generate and procreate the infinite energy of life, right? And then 6.28 is returning to the center, the Tao Te Ching, right? Which I call God, because returning to the center is God. Sometimes I'll do the first 7 multiples of the kin number, and then I'll also look up the first 7 kin equivalents. Look at the oracle, so the analog is 124, the guide is 7, the antipode is 85, and the occult is 46. I'll usually add those up, just the 4, and then I'll add also the kin, the destiny kin as well with it. For instance, today the oracle sums to 262, as, all resonant kin will encode kin 2. Whether they add up to 522 or 262. But if you add 215 onto 262, you get 477, which is encoding kin 217. So something about today is it's referencing 2 days from now. So you see what I'm saying? You see what these things are doing? And then I also look up the gematria sums of each of the oracles, so of the numbers, right? So for instance, I'll look up the gematria sum for 124, the gematria sum for 7, the gematria sum for 85, and the gematria sum for 46, right? And then I add those numbers up again, just like I did the oracle, with the 4 auxiliary parts of the oracle, right? And then also one with the 5th one included, right? The center, that G-force, right? And then I usually just do the centagers, right? So what's the centager of 215? It's 108. And what is 215 the centager of? Well, 429. Again, if you lay out the numbers 215 on a number line, what is that center digit, like the 7 and the 13 of the septenary gematria cipher? It's 108. So that's related to phi and all kinds of other stuff, right? And that's the center of today's kin. And 215 today is the center of 429. So there's many things that go into that, but you know, there's still a whole bunch of like systems that I don't even include. You know what I'm saying? That I don't ever really have time to do, like the Tao Te Ching alignments, the scepter gem keys, etc. The scepter gem keys, I call the gematria letters in terms of how they align with the Zolkin and the Hob as scepters, just simply because it's like a nickname for septenary letters, right? Scepters. Or I call them the gem keys, right? Because it's gematria, gematria, etc. But yeah, some of the things that I want to point out here are in ways that the tarot, right? So within the tarot, you have 78 cards, right? 78 cards made up of two separate main systems, right? And you have your major arcana and your minor arcana, right? And these are two separate systems that are ultimately linked in becoming one system, right? So you have 78 cards altogether. You have 22 of your major arcana, and you have 56 of your minor arcana. The minor arcana is broken up into 4 subsets, which is pentacles, swords, cups, and wands, right? And the major arcana is 22 different individual archetypes of the other minor of the 56, right? Again, going back to what I was saying about the 360 degrees on a wheel, each one of the degrees of the wheel are individual nodes. They're individual little tiny pieces of a greater whole, right? So the tarot, this is another one, just like the I Ching, right? Just like the 72 spirits of God, etc. Again, it's just another one of these little mathematical matrices that's being encoded within cards for us to understand. It's being translated from the prismatic intelligence of God and manifested down onto paper and cardstock for us to understand the pattern, right? Again, we don't know where the tarot came from. We don't know how old it is. We don't know who brought it to us, but it's just there. And it's super deep if you actually dissect it and give it some credence. So every fortnight of the Hob is actually synchronized with a suit of the minor arcana, right? So you have 13 28-day moons, right? 13 28-day moons, which gives you a total of 364 days of the Mayan Hob, right? Or, you know, also known as the solar annual cycle, right? But it's also synchronized up with your 13 lunar cycles, right? So 13 28-day moons, right? If you look at the number of weeks, right, you have 52 weeks, right? 7 times 52 is the same. It's 364, right? But how many sets of 2 weeks do you have? How many fortnights do you have? Well, since 14 is double 7, then we just need to have 52. So we take 52, cut it in half, we have 26. So 14 times 26 is the same as 7 times 52, right? Simple. And that's the same as 13 times 28. So since there are 14 cards per suit of the minor arcana, right? That means for every day of each fortnight is synchronized up with an individual card, right? So for instance, the first 14 days, right, so we have 26 perfect fortnights within our 364 cycle, right? The 365th, like I've said before, like I've said many times, as well as what the Mayans talked about, 365 is day 0. It cancels out all time. It has no inherent value of your 13 lunar cycles, right? It's resetting. Everything resets back to 0. And so that is why they called it the day out of time or the day of no time, right? So we're looking at a perfect even number of 364, right? Which is actually deeply and intrinsically connected to the 360 degrees of the circle, which is how they figured it. It's like that's how they all figured that out by the patterns of the sun and Luna, right? The sun and Lun, right? They all figured out the degrees of a circle, all those things based upon the patterns and the movements of the heavens, right? So so for the first 14 days, or since we're dealing with 26 fortnights, that's 2 fortnights every moon, right? So we have 2 fortnights in the magnetic moon, 2 in the lunar, 2 in the electric, 2 in the self-existing, 2 in the overtone, 2 in the rhythmic, 2 in the resonant, 2 in the galactic, 2 in the solar, 2 in the planetary, 2 in the spectral, 2 in the crystal, 2 in the cosmic. 2 fortnights per 13 moons. Each of the 13 moons governed by 13 tones that are dimensions along our Kabbalah. Right? Okay. Now, moving on. The first 14 days of the first fortnight of the magnetic moon are each of the cards of the pentacle suit. So the first day of the first magnetic fortnight, we have the Ace of Pentacles, right? And then we have the 2 of Pentacles, 3 of Pentacles, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of Pentacles, and then we have Page, Knight, Queen, King, right? Each one of those various different mathematical archetypes, that's all related to the pentacles, and the pentacles has its own particular energy. It's physical, it's red, it's initiating, starting. The second fortnight of the magnetic moon is related to the swords. The swords is mental energy, right? I don't want to go into all the different archetypes of the sword, but it's mental energy, if you will, right? Then you have cups, wands, and so this is the interesting thing. Anytime that you can perfectly place a mirror within a symmetrical system, that mirror is there. Now, if you can't fit a mirror, even if you have an odd number system, say 3, you have your Trinity, right? You have your, let's say that this is, cardinal, fixed, mutable of your zodiac, right? Cardinal and fixed are opposites, right? So you have your masculine and your feminine, right? And then the mutable is kind of like a blend between the two, right? Actually, that's not a good example, but let's talk about 3, right? So let's call this on, discharge, or not discharge, neutral, off. On, neutral, off, right? On and off are dualities. They're opposites, right? On and off. The neutral is both and neither. Think of it like that, right? So it goes up and then it comes down. Goes up, comes down, right? So, but if you have 4, then let's say that this is 0, 1, 1, 0. 0, 1, 1, 0, right? And even if you're starting here, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, you see it has when you can place perfect symmetry within something, the symmetry is going to be there. But you can also think of it as 0, 1, 0, 1, right? So 0, 1, 0, 1, right? Or 0, 1, 1, 0, because it's a mirror, right? 1, 1, 0, 0, right? So now we have a doublet code, right? So because in the system of just going in order, so 0, 1, 0, 1, and then also the mirror order, which is 0, 1, 1, 0, now this one here is 0, 0. This one here would be 0, 1, right? Or, sorry, no, this would be 0, 0. This would be 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1. You see what I'm saying? So now you have a perfect system. So of symmetry and order. So 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, right? And again, that goes back to your alchemical process, right? So here, I'll show you. So you have pentacles, swords, cups, wands. Now we're going backwards because we have to mirror this first half, right? Or this first quarter. So now it goes wands, cups, swords, pentacles. Pentacles, swords, cups, wands. The resonant moon is different, right? And I'll get into that most likely another time. But the resonant moon stands apart. So you if you split that one away, now you have 12 moons, right? So now you have an even number that you can evenly distribute these things, right? Which goes back to your 12 zodiac signs. The 12 zodiac signs are the 12 around the 13th, right? That